George had just turned 79. Like most retirees, he could have chosen a peaceful life, waking up in the morning, sipping coffee on the porch, reading the newspaper, and occasionally playing golf with friends. But George was not like most people. He wasn't seeking idleness. Instead, he wanted to do something different, something few elderly people dared to attempt in front of his garage. George hung a handmade sign, letters slightly crooked but full of determination. Broken stuff. Bring it here, no charge. Just tea and conversation. This seemingly simple sign was the beginning of countless stories, connections, and subtle miracles that George was about to create. Maple Grove, a small town with red brick streets, golden-leaved trees in autumn, and closely packed wooden houses, was no stranger to quirky acts, but George's sign made everyone pause and talk. The town barber muttered, who would repair things for free. Is he out of his mind? But George didn't mind. He was used to skeptical glances and whispers. He knew that some people would never understand his true motivation, and that sometimes kindness has to endure doubt to survive. The reason George did this lay deep in his heart. His wife, Ruth, who had spent her entire life mending torn clothes, repairing cracked photo frames, and helping anyone who knocked on their door, had passed away the previous year. Ruth always said, "Waste is a habit. Kindness is the cure." Her words echoed in George's mind every day. He remembered Ruth's skilled hands, remembered her sitting there stitching each torn garment for neighbors, remembered the evenings she made tea, shared stories, and taught him that kindness doesn't have to be grand or loud. It's how we care for even the smallest things. Hanging the sign, George felt both nervous and relieved. He knew his actions wouldn't be immediately accepted by everyone. Some would think he was eccentric, some would doubt his intentions. But George didn't care. He only knew that he wanted to continue Ruth's legacy, to reduce the brokenness in the world around him, not just of objects, but of lives, stories, and unfinished hopes. On the first day, only a few curious people came by. They looked at the sign, looked at George, then chuckled and walked away. But George paid no mind. He organized his old toolbox, dusted off the screwdriver Ruth had once used, and prepared himself for the days ahead. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the trees, creating patches of light on the garage floor, the doorbell rang. Mia, an 8-year-old girl with big round eyes and messy curly hair, pulled along a plastic toy car with a broken wheel. She timidly said, "My dad said we don't have enough money to buy a new one." George looked at the car and sensed the helplessness in her eyes. He rummaged through his toolbox, carefully choosing tools and finding temporary but sturdy replacements. An hour later, the toy car rolled smoothly across the floor again. Now, with a wheel made from a bottle cap, secured with silver tape. George winked. "Now, it's a special edition." Mia grinned from ear to ear, her eyes shining like the sun. Her joy brought George a simple, rustic, yet deeply profound happiness. Mia's mother lingered, eyes full of hope and a touch of anxiety. "Sir, can you fix a job application too?" George only smiled. Part of him was surprised, part of him warmed. His actions had suddenly become more meaningful than just fixing objects. They were bridges connecting people, connecting hope and opportunity. That day, George's garage became more than just a repair shop. It became a place for stories, a place where unfinished lives met attention and care. An elderly woman brought a broken clock, speaking of her husband who wound it every Sunday morning. A teenage boy brought a torn backpack, teased by his friends, wanting it to last longer. George fixed everything, free of charge, but with his whole heart. He was no longer alone. A retired teacher helped people write CVs. An old seamstress stitched backpacks. Passers-by stopped to watch and learn. George's garage became a magical gathering point, a place where people could share grief, joy, and the things they thought had lost hope. Every wheel, every clock, every torn garment that George repaired was not just an object. It was his way of healing the unfinished things Ruth had always believed were important. And in every smile, every look of gratitude, George found vitality he thought had vanished since his wife passed away. Day by day, George's garage became a small but powerful symbol in Maple Grove. People began to tell each other stories about the old man with a screwdriver, about the strange sign, about the small yet heartwarming events that subtly changed daily life in the town. George knew he was starting something bigger than himself, and the story of him, of Ruth, of kindness, was only just beginning. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the trees along the quiet streets of Maple Grove, casting golden patches across George's garage floor. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, and the sound of hurried footsteps on the brick sidewalks brought a gentle rhythm to the day. George stood by the garage door, his eyes gazing out, a quiet anticipation building in his chest. He had a feeling today was going to be special. Soon, the bell above the garage door jingled. Mia, the bright-eyed, curly-haired 80-year-old from yesterday, appeared, this time holding her mother's hand. Her mother, a young woman worn from months of searching for a job, carried the faint lines of worry on her face, but her eyes still held a spark of hope. Mia stepped forward, her little hand gripping her mum's tightly. "Mr. George, I brought something else. My mom needs help," she said softly. George smiled and waved them inside. The garage, usually filled with the scent of wood, oil, and the faint aroma of tea, felt cozy in the morning light filtering through the windows. Tools were neatly arranged, old screwdrivers, rolls of silver tape, leftover bits of plastic from previous repairs, needles and thread, and, of course, Ruth's old screwdriver, quiet reminder of his late wife's steady hands and the kindness she had taught him to carry forward. Mia's mother handed him her job application, her handwriting careful but shaky, each word laced with her worry. George sat beside her, calmly reviewing every detail, guiding her on how to highlight her skills and experience, teaching her how to tell her story in a way that would catch an employer's eye. He moved slowly, patiently, chatting gently to ease her nerves, making the process feel less like a test and more like a conversation. Mia stood quietly, watching George at work, her eyes wide with curiosity and admiration. George glanced at her and said softly, "Sometimes the biggest thing that's broken isn't a toy or a tool. It's the chances we haven't taken, the hopes we've left unfinished, and all of that can be fixed." Mia's eyes lit up as if she had just discovered a secret about the world. She bent down, carefully placing her toy car into George's hands, as though giving thanks without needing words. George smiled, tapping the little car gently. "Take good care of it, okay? It'll always remind you that even broken things can be made whole again." Within half an hour, the garage doors opened again. A teenage boy shuffled in with a battered backpack, eyes a little red from teasing at school. An elderly woman brought in a cracked old clock, her hands trembling but her eyes bright with memories of her late husband, who had wound that clock faithfully every Sunday. A middle-aged woman carried a broken microwave, unsure how to fix it. One by one, people arrived, each carrying their own story, each trusting George and his peculiar sign. George moved among them, checking backpacks, adjusting clocks, showing the teenager how to repair straps and buckles, listening to the elderly woman recount stories from her past, sharing memories of Ruth and her lifelong devotion to helping neighbors, mending what was broken with care and patience. A retired teacher, a neighbor, came over to help Mia's mum polish her resume, step by step, showing her how to frame her experiences, how to write confidently about herself. The old seamstress delicately stitched every torn seam on the backpack, repairing its fabric so it would last longer than before. The garage was alive with sound, screwdrivers turning, sewing needles clicking, soft chatter, laughter of children, an orchestra of warmth, small acts, and human connection as the elderly woman shared about her husband winding the clock each Sunday morning. The teenage boy listened intently, absorbing the quiet lessons of care and love that lived in small routines. George watched it all unfold, realizing that he wasn't just repairing objects, he was helping to mend stories, hearts, and unfinished hopes. By late afternoon, the sun softened, casting long shadows across the garage. People began to leave, carrying their repaired items, their small victories, and the warmth of shared stories. Mia grabbed her mum's hand, running toward the door with a big grin. "Mr. George, you're amazing. You make everything special," she said, her voice bright with joy. George watched them go, eyes glistening, heart full of quiet hope. He knew today was only the beginning. The wheels, clocks, backpacks, job applications, these were just the first pieces of a much bigger story. A story about kindness, connection, and believing that even the broken parts of our world and our lives can be mended. In the days that followed, George's garage became busier than ever. Seniors, children, teens, parents all came through the doors. Some just wanted to talk, some wanted guidance, others came to learn a new skill, and some simply needed their broken things fixed. That little space became a hub of community, a place where every small act of kindness built upon another, where people helped each other, where hope grew. And George realized something profound. He wasn't just fixing broken items. He was mending unfinished stories, hearts that needed care, and dreams that hadn't yet found their chance. The most magical thing was seeing others start to help too. The teacher guiding kids with their resumes, the seamstress showing someone how to sew, teenagers learning to mend socks and small electronics. Every act of kindness multiplied, creating a lively, connected community, where compassion was the common language, and deep down, George knew this was Ruth's true legacy, not the objects she'd fixed, not money or recognition, but the ripple of kindness, the connection between people, and the ability to make the world warmer and fuller of hope, piece by piece. In the days that followed, George's garage became busier than ever. It wasn't just broken items that people brought, it was their stories, their hopes, and fragments of unfinished lives. George realized he wasn't merely fixing things. He was mending hearts, easing worries, and helping people regain a sense of confidence they hadn't felt in a long time. One morning, when the dew still clung to the eaves and birds filled the air with song, a group of teenagers lingered hesitantly outside the garage. They were kids from the neighborhood, often watching George help others, but never daring to step inside. George looked at them with a warm smile. "Come on in, kids," he called. "There's nothing to be afraid of. Everyone can learn to fix things. One boy spoke up, voice tentative. "Sir, I want to fix my bike tire, but I don't know where to start." George nodded and invited him to sit at the workbench. He brought out a few basic tools and patiently showed the boy how to remove the wheel, inspect the inner tube, and reassemble it securely. When the first attempt didn't work perfectly, George said gently, "That's okay. Take your time. Every mistake is just another chance to learn." The air warmed with laughter and encouragement. Another girl brought a broken desk lamp, her eyes shy. "Can you fix this? My mum gave it to me for my birthday." George examined the lamp, taking her hand in his, and said, "Of course. We'll make it shine again. But more importantly, you'll learn how to care for the things that matter most." The teenagers gradually relaxed, laughing, asking questions, learning how to use screwdrivers, tape, and carefully dismantle items. George noticed that when people learned to fix things, they were also learning to repair their confidence and self-belief. That same week, an elderly woman arrived with a delicate old clock that had stopped running. She told George it was the only thing left of her late husband, and every time she looked at it, she remembered the Sunday mornings they'd shared coffee and wound the clock together. George listened closely, carefully taking apart the gears, cleaning and oiling them, then reassembling everything. When the clock ticked back to life, tears welled in her eyes, stares of joy and gratitude. By that afternoon, the garage was full. A middle-aged woman brought a broken microwave. A boy carried a tattered backpack, and another teenager brought a skateboard with a snapped axle. George, along with his helpers, the retired teacher, the old seamstress, worked tirelessly. Everyone found a role. Some sewed, some guided repairs, some took notes, some poured tea for the group. As the sunlight faded, George stepped outside and looked over the grassy area in front of the garage, where people had paused to chat, laugh, and share their personal stories. He thought to himself, "This is exactly what Ruth wanted, not just fixing objects, but mending the things that are broken inside people." An idea began to take shape in George's mind. Why not make this garage an official space, an open place, where anyone could bring broken items, learn to repair them, and connect with others? He started planning, sketching layouts for repair stations, a bike corner, a sewing corner, an electronics corner, and even a spot for resume writing. He hung Ruth's quotes on the walls as gentle reminders of her spirit, kindness, care, and community. Old tools were cleaned and organized, a tea station set up with small cups, a classic teapot, and a few homemade cookies. The grand opening of the little corner of Ruth arrived. The townspeople of Maple Grove were curious and excited. Children, teenagers, seniors, parents all gathered, bringing broken things, but, more importantly, carrying stories and hope. George stood in the center, eyes bright, heart racing, and raised his hand. Everyone went quiet. "This isn't just a place to fix broken things," he began. "It's a place to learn how to care, to help, and to not give up on the things that matter, no matter how small. Let's create a community where kindness is the only rule." Applause filled the garage. Laughter, conversation, and the sounds of tools blended together into a lively, warm symphony. A teenager repaired his skateboard while a girl learned to patch torn clothes. An elderly woman tinkered with her old clock. Everyone was learning, helping, and connecting. George watched quietly, realizing he had created something bigger than himself, a place where people, skills, and kindness intertwined, a space where stories could heal, smiles could multiply, and hope could be rekindled. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees, George stood at the door of the little corner of Ruth, breathing a deep, contented sigh. Watching people leave with their repaired items, he felt a quiet, profound happiness. He knew Ruth would be smiling, seeing all that he had accomplished. In the weeks that followed, the little corner of Ruth became an essential part of Maple Grove. George's small garage had transformed into a lively hub, where people of all ages, from children to seniors, came through the doors. Everyone brought a broken item, but behind each one was a story, a worry, a dream left unfinished, and a heart in need of healing. One Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the windows as George stepped onto the porch and saw a line of people patiently waiting, carefully placing their items down, smiling at him as they arrived. Mia, now 9, stood near her mother, holding the toy car George had fixed for her months ago. "Mr. George." "Today Mum brought an old computer," Mia said. George nodded, smiling. "Perfect. We'll get it running again, and who knows, maybe your mum will find the job she's been dreaming of." People filtered inside the garage one by one. An elderly woman brought a creaky old sewing machine. A teenage boy carried a tattered backpack and asked, "Mr. George, can I learn how to sew and patch it?" "Of course," George replied. Mending teaches patience, and patience teaches a lot more than sewing. The space buzzed with energy but remained warm and welcoming. The sounds of screwdrivers, sewing machines, scissors, and conversation blended into a symphony of connection. While repairing their items, people shared their stories. The elderly woman spoke of Sunday mornings with her late husband, winding clocks and drinking coffee together. The teenage boy told of his parents' divorce and how the backpack was the only thing he had left from school days. A young woman shared her struggles with unemployment and repeated job rejections that had made her lose confidence. George listened closely. Each story was a piece of the town's tapestry. He moved from person to person, skillfully repairing items, while gently guiding and encouraging people to learn the basics themselves. Meanwhile, the retired teacher helped a young man rewrite his resume, and the old seamstress carefully stitched torn backpacks, teaching children how to be meticulous and patient. Mia watched her mother work on the computer, eyes bright with excitement as her mum learned to send out job applications. Another teenager brought a skateboard with a broken axle, and George patiently showed him how to disassemble and reassemble it. The boy's eyes lit up not just because the skateboard was being fixed, but because he was learning to believe in his own abilities. "Mr. George, I never thought I could do this," the boy admitted. "Now you know you can. Keep trying and never give up. Everything can be fixed," George said, eyes glistening as he thought of Ruth. Suddenly, the garage door opened, and a small group of young mothers stepped in, bringing broken toys from their children. One mother said, "We heard you fix things for free, and we want our kids to learn that broken things aren't always meant to be thrown away." George smiled and made space for them. "Exactly. And more than that, every item we fix teaches patience, care, and how to cherish what might otherwise be forgotten." As the afternoon wore on, sunlight softened, and the little corner of Ruth was filled with laughter, conversation, and the faint aroma of hot tea. George watched people leave with their repaired items, carrying not just the things they had brought, but also lessons, stories, and smiles. He thought quietly to himself, Ruth would be smiling to see all of this. Small acts, like fixing a toy car, mending a backpack, or helping someone rewrite a resume, were creating a ripple effect. The Maple Grove community was becoming closer, warmer, and stories of kindness were being told and remembered. A new idea sparked in George's mind. Why not expand even further? Not just the garage, but outdoor workshops where people could learn to fix things, develop life skills, and share their own stories. He imagined a Maple Grove where everyone, from children to elders, could find a place to learn, connect, and know they were never alone as the sun set behind the trees. George looked over everything, the smiling faces, the busy hands fixing and learning, the stories being shared, and felt a deep warmth. He whispered to himself, "We're repairing more than just things. We're repairing lives." From that moment on, the little corner of Ruth was no longer just a garage. It had become the heart of Maple Grove, a place where people came not just to fix things, but to find empathy, learn to care, and realize that kindness never goes out of style. In the weeks that followed, the little corner of Ruth became busier than ever. Every day, George woke up with excitement and a hint of anticipation, not just because of the broken items that needed fixing, but because of the stories to be told, hearts to be touched, and new hopes to be kindled. One chilly Monday morning, George opened the garage door to find a line of people stretching all the way to Main Street. Children, teenagers, seniors, young families, all stood waiting. Mia, now 10, stood beside her mother, eyes shining as she held her special edition toy car. "Mr. George, today Mum brought a broken printer. She needs to print her job applications," Mia said eagerly. George smiled and waved. "Perfect. We'll get it running again, and more importantly, your mum will find new opportunities." People started bringing their items inside the garage. An elderly woman carried a vintage radio, a boy a tattered backpack, a teenager a broken skateboard, and a young woman a malfunctioning blender. The space buzzed with laughter, conversation, and the sounds of tools at work. George and his helpers, the retired teacher, the seamstress, and a few new volunteers divided themselves among the crowd. Guiding, repairing, and chatting, George moved from person to person, his hands deftly taking apart and repairing each item. He wasn't just fixing things. He was teaching people to do it themselves, showing patience, precision, and, most importantly, belief in their own abilities. A boy learned to disassemble and reassemble the skateboard, his face lighting up as the axle clicked back into place. He looked at George, eyes filled with newfound confidence. "Mr. George, I never thought I could do this. Now you know you can. Keep trying and don't give up. Everything can be fixed." George replied warmly, his mind quietly thinking of Ruth. At another corner, the elderly woman repaired her old radio. When music played again, her eyes glistened with memories of youth and Sunday mornings spent listening with her husband. Mia helped her here and there, carefully lifting small gears, fascinated by the process. A middle-aged woman brought her blender. Anxious, "Mr. George, I've never fixed anything before. What if I break it?" "That's okay. We'll learn together." "Everyone starts small," George reassured her. The boy, the elderly woman, and the middle-aged woman worked side by side, learning from each other, repairing and sharing experiences. Everyone taught and helped, creating a warm, connected space. Meanwhile, Mia helped her mother finalize her job applications. The retired teacher guided how to write emails and send resumes, and the seamstress mended torn backpacks for school children. A few volunteers taught kids how to patch socks and mend clothes. By noon, sunlight streamed through the garage windows. George stood back, taking in the lively scene, the laughter of children, the chatter of adults, the rhythmic sounds of tools. He realized that every small action, fixing a toy, mending a backpack, helping someone send a resume, was spreading kindness throughout Maple Grove. Suddenly, a group of young mothers entered, carrying broken toys from their children. One said, "We heard you fix things for free, and we want our kids to know that broken things aren't always meant to be thrown away." George smiled and made room for them. Exactly. And more than that, each item repaired teaches patience, care, and love. As the afternoon faded, everyone left with their fixed items, carrying not only things but also stories, smiles, and a sense of healing. George stood at the door of the little corner of Ruth, taking a deep breath, feeling warmth spreading in his chest. He knew Ruth would be smiling at all that he had accomplished. A community where kindness not only exists but grows stronger every day. That evening, George decided to put up a new sign. Here, everything can be fixed, and everyone deserves care. People looked at the sign, smiled, and nodded. The little corner of Ruth had truly become a symbol of kindness, connection, and hope for the entire town of Maple Grove. The little corner of Ruth had truly become the heart of Maple Grove. George realized that this place wasn't just for fixing things. It was where people found connection, trust, and empathy. Every day, lives that once seemed separate were slowly weaving together, like patches on the big quilt Ruth had once sewn. One crisp autumn morning, golden leaves drifting on the porch, George opened the door to see a group of teenagers lingering outside. These were the kids who had often hung around the garage before, too shy to step inside. Today, they brought broken items, but more importantly, they brought curiosity and excitement. "Mr. George, we want to learn how to fix bikes." One boy stepped forward, his voice trembling slightly, eyes shining. George smiled and nodded. "Perfect. Let's learn together, and along the way, learn to trust in yourselves." He led the group to the bike repair corner, pulling out basic tools and showing each step patiently. The boy removed the wheel, inspected the inner tube, and tried to reassemble it. His first attempt failed, and he looked disappointed. George placed a hand on his shoulder gently. "That's okay. Every mistake is a lesson. We never learn if we don't make mistakes." The teenagers slowly relaxed, learning bike repair while chatting and laughing with one another. A girl peeked at George and asked, "Mr. George, why do you do all this for free?" George looked at her kindly. "Because kindness should never be measured in money. It spreads, it heals, and it makes the world better." The girl smiled, carrying away a newfound belief in goodness. Meanwhile, the elderly woman repairing her old radio taught Mia how to clean tiny components. The teenager fixing the skateboard showed a younger boy how to remove and replace the axle. A young woman guided her mother in mending a torn shirt. Everyone learned from one another, gave and received help, forming a strong, unspoken network of support. Outside sunlight filtered through golden leaves. Passers-by paused to watch, smiling. A young mother stepped in with her daughter's tattered backpack. "My daughter wants to learn how to fix things, so she won't throw away everything that breaks." George nodded. "Exactly. Every item repaired is not just a thing, it's a lesson in patience, love, and confidence." The next day, George found a small note in the mailbox. It was from Mia, now 11. "Mr. George, I loved learning how to fix bikes and toys. I see now that everything that seems broken can be fixed, and people can too. I want to help others just like you." George read the note again and again, tears in his eyes. He realized that these small lessons, these simple acts of kindness, were growing in the hearts of the next generation. Ruth would be proud. Later that week, a group of middle-aged townspeople gathered, bringing broken electronics and household items. They didn't just want repairs, they wanted to establish a monthly community repair day. The idea was met with enthusiastic support. George smiled. This was the next step, turning the little corner of Ruth into an essential part of the town's life. As dusk fell and the last light filtered through the windows, George watched people leave with their repaired items, smiling and carrying stories of healing. He thought of Ruth, of her words, "Waste is a habit. Kindness is a way to heal." He understood now that even the smallest actions could create big changes. Repaired items, revived confidence, renewed hope. They were all creating a strong, connected community where kindness spread freely. When night fell, warm light spilled from the garage, glowing softly like a beacon for Maple Grove. George smiled and whispered to himself, "We're fixing more than things. We're fixing lives." From that moment, the little corner of Ruth was no longer just a repair garage. It had become a place where people came to learn, to help, and to feel the human connection that proves kindness always has a way to spread. Winter was approaching, and Maple Grove was shrouded in a light morning mist, with chilly winds sweeping through the narrow streets. The little corner of Ruth remained brightly lit and warmer than ever. George realized that, as kindness spread, it brought not only joy but also new challenges. One Tuesday morning, he stepped outside to find a line of people at the gate, this time with a tense, anxious look. Some carried old, worn items, eyes full of worry. A boy slowly approached, clutching a nearly destroyed handheld gaming console. "Mr. George?" "My dad says this can't be fixed," the boy said, voice trembling. George nodded gently. "We'll do our best, and even if we fail, at least we tried." Meanwhile, a group of teenagers brought a broken industrial printer. A middle-aged woman carried an old refrigerator, and a young couple brought a malfunctioning microwave. The small garage suddenly became busier than ever, but George remained calm. He gathered everyone, assigned tasks, and guided them step by step. "Everything can be fixed if we work together," he said. The boy learned to disassemble the gaming console, hands shaking but determined. Mia stood beside him, eyes bright, guiding him with George's instructions. The elderly woman repairing her radio chuckled softly, reminding everyone, "Be patient. Everything takes time." Together, they worked, repaired, and slowly brought life back to seemingly hopeless items. The space buzzed with laughter, clattering tools, and animated conversations. George realized that challenges were not barriers, they were opportunities to learn patience, skill, and self-belief. Mid-morning, a middle-aged man walked in with a broken electric bike. He had been a mechanic, but left his profession after a personal setback. He looked at George nervously. "Mr. George, can I even learn again?" George grasped his hand warmly. "Of course. Anyone can learn again if they are willing to try." Together, they disassembled the bike, step by step, learning as they went. When the electric bike finally ran again, the man's eyes sparkled with pride, and a broad smile appeared. George smiled too, realizing that while fixing items brought joy, restoring someone's confidence was the greatest achievement. That same week, the town held an emergency meeting about public space usage. Some residents were wary, concerned the free repairs might cause trouble or violate regulations. George stood before the council, explaining carefully, "We're not just fixing things. We're teaching skills, connecting people, and reducing waste. This benefits everyone." Local reporters captured the moment, asking residents, "Is kindness illegal?" Images of the little corner of Ruth spread across the news, and the community largely supported George. Legal challenges and outside pressure could not dampen George's passion. He decided to expand the project, planning outdoor workshops where people could learn to repair items, gain life skills, and share their own stories. Mia, now 12, beamed as she helped her mother and younger children fix toys. She wrote in her diary, "Mr. George has shown me that nothing is hopeless. Everything, from objects to people, can be revived with patience and kindness." As the sun set, golden light streaming through the windows, George stood at the garage door, watching people leave with repaired items and smiles. He whispered to himself, "Every challenge is an opportunity. Every item is a lesson, and every person who regains confidence is a gift." From that moment, the little corner of Ruth was no longer just a repair garage. It became a place of learning, growth, and proof that kindness, patience, and trust can overcome any obstacle. Maple Grove was being mended not only through fixed items, but also through renewed hope and human connection. Winter had settled over Maple Grove, bringing misty mornings and chilly winds that swept through the small streets. Yet inside the little corner of Ruth, the space remained warm, buzzing with laughter, the sounds of tools, and the comforting aroma of hot tea. One Saturday morning, George opened the door to a long line of people waiting outside. Not just children and teenagers, but elderly folks, women, and even visitors from neighboring towns. They brought old, broken items, but more importantly, they carried stories, worries, and hope. Mia, now 13, stood beside her mother, holding her special edition toy car. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. "Mr. George, so many people brought things today. Can I help?" George smiled and nodded. Of course, help them learn to fix things, and at the same time, teach patience and care. An elderly woman brought an antique clock, a boy carried a tattered backpack, and a teenager brought a broken computer. George and the volunteers organized tasks and guided everyone step by step. The space filled with laughter, clattering tools, and stories beginning to emerge. A middle-aged couple brought an old refrigerator. The husband said, "We can't afford a new one. This is the last fridge we have that still works." George nodded, smiling gently. "Don't worry. We'll fix it, and you'll see that what seems broken still holds value." A boy learned to repair an electric bike, hands shaking but determined. Mia guided him carefully, listening as he shared his dream of building robots. George looked around and realized that sometimes unspoken stories carry more meaning than words ever could. The elderly woman fixing the clock told tales of her late husband and their Sunday mornings winding the clock together, sipping coffee and talking. The teenager fixing the computer shared the pressure of school and the loneliness of busy parents. A young mother learned to mend her child's shirt, while an older man taught children to handle tools carefully. People were not just fixing items, they were sharing lives, learning to listen, empathize, and find hope in one another. The little corner of Ruth had become a place where people came not only to receive help, but also to give it, where personal stories wove a strong thread of community. Mid-afternoon, George found a note in the mailbox. It was from Mia, now 13. Mr. George, I realized that every repaired item carries a story. Everyone here isn't just fixing things, they're healing each other's hearts. I want to continue this work, so no one ever feels alone. George read the note over and over, warmth spreading through his chest. He knew Ruth had been right. Kindness cannot be measured by money, and small actions can create monumental change. As evening fell, golden light spilled from the garage, glowing like a beacon in winter. George watched people leave with repaired items, smiles lighting their faces. In his heart, every small story was proof that a community could grow stronger and closer when filled with kindness, patience, and care. Standing at the garage door, George breathed deeply and whispered, "Every item has its story, and every story deserves to be heard. We're not just fixing things, we're mending hearts and hope." From that moment on, the little corner of Ruth was no longer just a repair garage. It had become a place where stories, listening, and kindness met, and where every person left carrying hope, lessons, and a piece of the community's warmth. Winter had passed, and Maple Grove was entering the early days of spring, with gentle sunlight and wildflowers beginning to bloom along the streets. The little corner of Ruth had become an indispensable part of the town. George realized that kindness didn't stop at fixing objects or teaching skills, it spread in ways he had never imagined. One weekend morning, George opened the door to see new faces, families from neighboring towns, teenagers and the elderly. They brought broken or worn items, but more importantly, they carried stories, curiosity, and a desire to learn. Mia, now 14, stood beside George, helping guide younger children in repairing toys and bikes. She wrote simple instructions on a whiteboard, beaming as she watched the children confidently complete their repairs. "Mr. George, everyone is so happy. I want us to do even more," she said. George smiled. "Exactly, Mia. Kindness grows the more we share it. Every skill learned, every story heard, every item repaired is a thread connecting our community." That morning, a teenager returned the electric bike he had brought last week, but this time he didn't come for repairs. Instead, he brought some tools and said, "Mr. George, I want to help others fix things, just like you helped me." George felt a warmth in his heart. This was proof that kindness can multiply, passing from one person to another, creating an endless chain of giving at the same time. An elderly woman brought an old sewing machine, and a young mother brought her daughter's torn toy. George assigned Mia and volunteers to guide them. The garage filled with laughter, clattering tools, and shared stories. A young mother spoke to George softly. "Mr. George, I feel healed just being here. Not only are our things fixed, but we feel cared for." George nodded, eyes glistening. That's exactly what Ruth wanted. Kindness doesn't just repair things, it heals hearts. Everyone worked together, exchanged skills, learned patience, and trusted one another. A boy who had once been afraid to touch his bike now confidently disassembled and reassembled it. An elderly woman, once hesitant around children, now shared stories and guided them in repairs around noon. George received another letter, this time from Mia. Now 14 and learning robotics programming. "Mr. George, I realize that every kind act spreads. I'm building a solar-powered robotic arm, and I want to help others just like you helped me. Thank you for teaching me to see value in things that seem broken." George read the letter, eyes misty. He looked around at the smiling faces, the repaired items, and the stories being shared, and he knew that the little corner of Ruth had become a center of kindness, a place where people learned to live with generosity, patience, and care for one another. As the sun set, warm light spilled from the garage, shining on radiant faces and repaired items. George stood watching, thinking, we're not just fixing objects. We're mending hearts, restoring trust, and strengthening the community. From that moment on, Maple Grove was no longer just a small town. It had become a place where kindness spread, where stories, skills, and humanity intersected, and where everyone felt they were never truly alone. Spring had fully arrived in Maple Grove, painting every street with bursts of color as flowers bloomed in front yards and along sidewalks. The sunlight filtered softly through the branches of old oak trees, creating dappled patterns on the pavement. The little corner of Ruth had transformed from a simple garage into something far greater, the beacon of hope and kindness. People came here knowing they would find help, learn new skills, or simply have someone listen to their story. George stood at the garage door, his hands tucked into the pockets of his worn jacket, watching a steady stream of people carrying broken objects inside. Mia, now 15, moved gracefully among the children, demonstrating how to take apart and reassemble bicycle gears. Her energy was contagious, her confidence inspiring. She was living proof that Ruth's lessons and George's dedication to carrying them forward had taken root. A teenage boy approached, a broken watch clutched in his hands. His fingers trembled as he opened the back casing, fear and hesitation etched on his face. George knelt beside him, his voice calm and reassuring. "You can do this. Take it slow and pay attention to every little detail." The boy inhaled deeply, then began carefully following George's instructions. As the tiny gears clicked into place and the watch ticked once more, his eyes lit up with wonder. A wide smile spread across his face. George smiled back, feeling a warmth that went far beyond fixing a piece of metal, and Springs this was about igniting hope, building confidence, and reminding someone of their own potential. Throughout the day, families from neighboring towns arrived, each with their own treasures needing attention. A mother brought an old computer, her son carried a half-dismantled toy robot, and another woman lugged a toaster that had long stopped working. George and the volunteers assigned tasks carefully, guiding everyone with patience. Laughter mingled with the clatter of tools, the occasional exclamation of surprise when something worked again, and the steady hum of conversation. The garage buzzed with life, transforming into a living classroom and a communal gathering space all at once. An elderly woman shuffled in with a small refrigerator, a hesitant smile on her face. "I'm not sure this can be fixed, but my granddaughter said this place is special." George nodded warmly. "We'll give it a try. And remember, even if it doesn't work perfectly, the effort itself is worth something." Nearby, a group of teenagers had gathered around a broken printer and a set of electronic toys. They carefully disassembled, tinkered, and rebuilt the items, exchanging tips and encouraging one another. Mia moved among them, her eyes shining with pride as she watched these kids gain confidence through hands-on experience. George observed quietly, heart swelling. These small acts of care and attention were weaving an invisible but unbreakable web of community. Later that afternoon, George found a letter slipped under the workbench. It was from Mia, now interning at a robotics lab. "Mr. George, I've learned more than how to fix things. I've learned to see value in everything, to be patient, and to care about others. I'm building a solar-powered robotic arm, and I want to help people just like you helped me. Thank you for showing me that even small acts of kindness can create real change." George read the words slowly, his chest tightening with a mix of pride and bittersweet nostalgia. Around him, volunteers and visitors shared smiles, swapped stories, and celebrated tiny victories, repaired items, renewed hope, and rekindled trust. The little corner of Ruth was no longer just a garage. It had become a place that mended the world, one object and one heart at a time. As the sun began to set, golden light spilled across the garage floor, reflecting off bright faces and polished tools. George stood silently for a moment, absorbing the sight. Children laughing, adults exchanging advice, the elderly quietly nodding in appreciation. He whispered to himself, "Today, we've repaired more than things. We've repaired hearts, restored faith, and strengthened an entire community." In the following weeks, other towns began opening free repair centers inspired by George's model. Each one carried a piece of the spirit from the little corner of Ruth. People of all ages learned, shared, listened, and passed on their skills and compassion to others. George knew Ruth would be proud of the way the simple act of helping others had multiplied into something so meaningful. Sitting at his worn workbench, he lifted his trusty screwdriver, looking out at the lively garage one last time that day. With just a willing hand and a patient heart, we can fix broken things, heal wounded hearts, and light up entire communities. Even the smallest corner of the world can become vast when kindness spreads. From that day on, Maple Grove was no longer just a small town tucked away in the countryside. It became a place where kindness, knowledge, and stories intersected. Place where hope, connection, and the power of human goodness thrived. The world that once seemed fragile had been mended not through wealth or grand gestures, but through simple acts of care, patience, and compassion. Even years later, children would visit the little corner of Ruth, watching volunteers repair bicycles, toys, and gadgets, unaware that what they were learning was far greater than any mechanical skill. They were learning to see the value in themselves, to nurture others, and to carry forward the spark of kindness. And that, George thought, was the greatest repair of all, the repair of the human spirit.